Please join me in welcoming our next speaker, Mr. Michael Forrester. Michael is a research scientist at Iowa State University, originally a traditional experimentalist. Michael's responsibilities are now predominantly focused on acquisition of grants and the mentorship of grad students. He is currently helping manage 7 different research projects. He was also a contributor to 3 Iowa State University technologies that are being commercialized: polyacrylate glycerol-based wood adhesives, soybean oil asphalt rejuvenators, and polyacrylated soybean oil asphalt polymer modifiers. Michael and several collaborators have dedicated themselves to the commercialization of technologies developed at Iowa State University and have established 3 startup companies for this purpose. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you for the introduction. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our reactive extrusion as a tool for high-performance biomass-derived polymers. This is a group photo at our pilot plant from a couple of years ago. This facility was established in 2015 to produce a couple of tons per batch of one of our biopolymers, which I'm going to talk about in the next slides. And has been tremendously successful in getting recognition for our technology out into the industry. So I wanted to mention our research group. We've got currently 13 graduate students, 5 P&S scientists, and 20 or more undergraduates working with us. And the reason I wanted to mention that is because it means that our group is sufficiently large enough that we can get to work on a lot of different interesting topics. So we focus predominantly in 3 areas, and today I'm going to mostly focus on the first 2. We work a lot with biopolymers and applications for industrial use, asphalt materials, and then we do also do a decent amount of polymer fundamentals work. And so all 3 of these topics deal a lot with polymer processing and polymer characterization, which is why they're relevant to the microcompounding systems that we use. So we get a lot of funding from a lot of different agencies that have very keen interest in seeing bio-based technologies become commercially successful, especially high value, high volume sorts of applications like plastics. We've gotten a lot of funding from organizations like USB and the Iowa Soybean Board, and this has led to some of our pilot facilities and some of the advancement in the technologies that we're going to talk about today. So the main focus of our research group has been on the polyacrylated epoxidized high oleic soybean oil, or PAESO. And that's what that pilot plant that we showed in the earlier pictures was developed to produce. This material was originally thought of and conceptualized back in the 2008 to 2010 timeframe. And that came because we had a collaborator in the civil engineering department, Chris Williams, who had a bunch of industry contacts who wanted to find ways of limiting the amount of SBS use in the asphalt industry. SBS has been almost exclusively the polymer that's used in that industry. And there's some huge supply chain logistics issues that have come up, especially back in 2008. Most asphalt companies couldn't get their hands on SBS, and it caused a huge issue in the paving world because a lot of the pavements that needed to have polymer weren't modified with polymer, and it caused all kinds of issues. Predominantly, those are related to the cracking and the rutting of the roads. So polymer can help with both of these things. In the cracking, what happens is that at low temperatures, and with frequent loading of the vehicles driving across the pavement, you get these cracks to form, and that's what leads to things like potholes and issues with cars driving over them. Likewise, you have issues with rutting in high temperature environment where you end up with a lot of load on the road, and the pavement starts to basically flow. And what the polymers do is they help to dissipate some of the energy in the cracking mode, and they also help to provide some elasticity in the rutting mode. So the pavement will still deform to a degree, but it'll come back to where it originally was. And that SBS polymer was used for a long time. So we have developed this biopolymer system. It's the PAESO polymer in a soybean oil solvent, and we refer to that system as Biomag. We're beginning commercial sales, commercial productions of that this year, in a couple of months actually. And what we found is that this material does an amazing job of reducing the requirement of SBS. We can cut the needed material dosage by about a half to a third. In addition to that, because the biopolymer system is so chemically reactive, it actually rejuvenates a lot of the aged asphalts that are typically used in recycling. And so with this technology, you can actually use a high degree of recycled asphalt and still get high polymer quality paving roads. So you might ask, why does this matter in the world of compounding? Well, we have established that that material works very well in mixed terminals. So basically, when polymer is added to asphalt, they take it into a very high shear facility that basically breaks up the SBS and actually gets it incorporated into the asphalt. With our biopolymer, what we found is that we can get to the same elastic recovery, the same performance, but it takes a little bit longer. And that's not the end of the world for every terminal, because some people will have the time that's needed to allow that to occur. But it does cause some limiting effect on getting it as scaled as possible. And so one of the things that we wanted to look at is, how can we make this faster and also easier for both terminals and contractors to be able to produce high polymer paving grade asphalt. And so we got the idea of what if we combine the SBS and the Biomag system ahead of time and get some of the reactivity between the SBS and the Biomag done before it ever touches the asphalt. You don't want to go too far, because then you start forming thermosetting materials that won't get dispersed, but can we get it started and speed up the process? And so we've done a lot of development with the Haake system on getting these biopolymers incorporated in SBS. And what we found was that we can do some pretty incredible things by doing some of that pre-reactivity, pre-blending. Typically, if you take SBS and asphalt at the dosage rates of additives that we have, you can get to about a 20 to 25% elastic recovery. With the biopolymer pellet system, you can actually get up to about a 38% elastic recovery. This isn't perfect. We've done better with our pure Biomag system that's blended in the high shear facility. So there's still some development that we're working on, and so we're using this system to try to optimize some of the chemistry, get things a little more active so that once it gets into the asphalt, it more rapidly and more fully reacts. But what's really promising about this is that we did see as much of an improvement as we did on our initial tests, and also the ease of incorporation of these polymer systems into asphalt. Like I said, typically you use a high shear facility. With this particular technology, you actually don't need that anymore. You just need a standard overhead mixing system. And so what that allows is it allows terminals that maybe don't have that high shear capacity, or even contractors who are the ones who are responsible for laying the road, they can come in and produce a polymer grade material from just virgin standard grade feedstocks. And so that opens up a lot of possibilities. So after we dealt with the asphalt world and we started thinking about what's next for these sorts of materials, we immediately started thinking about plastics. What can we do to improve plastics? And so we started thinking about this molecule and what it's made up of. And the basic gist is that there's three predominantly very reactive sites on our polymer. There are acrylic, there are epoxies, and there are hydroxyl functionalities. And so when you think about, what sort of system would this work well with to get some reactive extrusion occurring, the thought that immediately comes to mind is polyesters. And so with everything moving towards a more green focus, we naturally wanted to move to a polyester system that had that in mind. And so what immediately comes to mind, of course, is PLA, polylactic acid. PLA is 100% bio-derived, it's compostable, it's strong, and it's, most importantly, it's commercially relevant. There are fairly large quantities of PLA sold every year. The problems with PLA is that it's extremely brittle and it has fairly low impact strength. These are the two main things that we're going to focus on trying to fix with our material. A couple of other challenges that we're not dealing with yet, but we have some ideas on, are fixing some of the crystallization and heat deflection temperature issues with PLA. But we had this thought, if we can take our PAESO system and incorporate it into the PLA using some of those functional groups, can we form some in situ graphs of PLA and PAESO to make something that has very high strength and end up making something that is ABS-like plastic. ABS is acrylonitropentadiene styrene, is one of the most useful engineering thermoplastics in the industry, but there's a huge push to move away from purely petrochemical non-compostable polymers. And so what we did is we took our PLA and we took our biomag that we talked about earlier. We compounded them in the mini lab, and then did some injection molding to make some nice tensile specimens and izod specimens. And we're kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but we liked some of the results so well, we actually went up to one of the larger compounders we had on campus and made about 2 to 3 pounds of the resin to do further testing on. So getting into some of the data here, what we've found is that the incorporation of this biomag has some pretty significant impacts on the tensile properties. So sample codes here, this BABS is PLA with biomag, and this BABSMA is PLA with a methacrylated PAESO system. And what you find is that the incorporation of those two materials can lead you to between 12 and 20% elongation at break, whereas virgin PLA is around 3 to 4%. So you dramatically improve the tensile toughness of the material. But we didn't see an increase in impact strength. In fact, we saw a slight decrease. And we started thinking about that. And one of the things that we looked at is the SEM imaging. And what we saw is that in the acrylate systems, you see a few of these microphase separated compounds, but not as much as you'd ideally like for something that would be a good impact modifier. In the methacrylated system, you do see a bit more of those phase separations, but you're still not seeing the increase in the impact resistance. So we got to thinking about, why is that happening and what can we do to improve things? Well, one of the immediate things that we think of is that our biosolvent is really good for the asphalt space, and it's very useful for the processing and production of the polymer, but it might be hurting us here in the production of these higher grade resins. And so what we did is we isolated the neat polymer, and that's what this brownish curve, a brown orange curve here is, and that's just the neat homopolymer. And what we saw is that we went from about an 80 to 120 joule per meter. So we increased the impact strength by about 50%. We further increased the elongation at break. So this material not only got much more tensily tough, but also got much more impact resistant. So we wanted to go a little bit further because we hadn't quite met the ABS-like properties yet. And so one of the things that's pretty well known about PLA and polymers in general is that when you're trying to do modification using microphase separation fundamental methods, one of the things that really helps is if you improve your interfacial interaction. And so we got to thinking about matrix miscible blocks that can help to do that. And so we initially started with the glycidyl methacrylate statistical copolymer, and that's what this blue curve is. And we see that we didn't change the impact strength much, but we did get quite the improvement in the elongation at break. And so from there, we also looked at the block copolymer. And that's what this dark brown curve is here. And that one is where we really started to see things shine. We went from something that had about an 80 joule per meter to about 240. So about a 3x increase in impact strength and orders of magnitude higher in tensile elongation. So just to describe what this system is a little bit, one of the things that is unique about our group is that we're one of the first that have really been able to get high molecular weight thermoplastics out of soybean oil. And we've done that through utilization of the raft polymerization method. It's a controlled radical method that allows us to ideally control some of the gelation cross-linking events that can occur with these multifunctional molecules. So what we did is we created a glycidyl methacrylate block using this raft method. Once that was done polymerizing, we polymerized the acrylated epoxidized soybean oil. And that makes this kind of complex, branchy sort of block copolymer system. And so that was then compounded in the Haake system with polylactic acid. And the thought was that if we were doing what we wanted to, the reactivity of these glycidyl groups here would allow grafts of PLA to form, and some nice micelles with good interfacial interaction would be generated. And the mechanical data certainly seems to support that that is occurring. And this particular plot shows a couple of different formulas of that block copolymer we produced. These are increasing glycidyl initial molecular weight blocks. These are all at about 13% glycidyl methacrylate, and they are all loaded into PLA at about 10%. I'm going to focus on this gray curve, the dark blue curve, and the green curve. This is PLA, our block copolymer, and ABS. And what we see is that by incorporation of this block copolymer, we have almost no change in tensile modulus, and in fact, or tensile strength. In fact, we see an increase compared to ABS. We do see a slight decrease in the stiffness of the material, but what's really impressive is our elongation at break and our tensile toughness and our fracture energy. This material has arguably much better mechanical properties than even ABS, and it comes from a resin that is bio-based and biocompostable, and is a lot more affordable. So this was really promising. One of the things that we wanted to look at is whether or not we were actually doing what we thought we were, and making sure we could explain those mechanical properties. And so we looked at some of the microscopy. And you know, the TEM definitely seems to suggest that yes, we are getting some of these nice micelles to form. And then on the tensile bars, one of the really cool things we saw is that you get these beautiful cavitations of the rubber domains as you start to stretch them. And that's one of the things that's pretty well known in the literature, that, you know, if you can get these good cavitations, you can get some really impressive mechanical properties, and that's what we saw here. So this particular technology is still in the fairly early stages of kind of our commercial process. But we're really hoping to get this thing to commercial pilot scale this year. Somewhere between 10 to 100 kilograms of resin made, so that we can work with some industry partners and get some prototype samples made. And then the hope is that, after some successful demonstration in 2022, we can actually get to the, tons per batch sort of scale, and get this into a lot of different resin formulators and people who would use these parts, to make some pretty cool advances with this technology. So just a couple of things that I wanted to go over before we conclude here is some of the other technologies that we've been able to work on because of this compounding system. So we have recently started working with polyamides, and anybody who works in the space knows that at the laboratory scale, polyamides can be really tricky because their melting points are so close to the point where oxidation becomes a big concern. And in the lab, that's a real big issue because, we're very surface area driven in the lab. So there's a lot of potential exposure to oxidative environment. And using the mini-lab, mini-jet system, we're actually able to produce something that normally would just very easily char to something that is very, very high quality sample that we can then go and do testing. And this is especially important because we deal a lot with some of the novelty sort of nylon species where we've got maybe an unsaturated on the linkage, and those are just so prone to oxidation that we really need the advanced processing techniques to be able to get something usable. The last thing I wanted to mention before we wrap up is some of our work on our asphalt GTR. So GTR is used to modify asphalt in a similar way that polymer can be used to modify asphalt. The one challenge is that there are some big separation issues that can occur over time. And that causes some pretty serious performance disadvantages in the field. And so one of the things that we had originally thought of was, can you fix the separation issue by basically combining the GTR with some other rubber particles to decrease the density so that they don't settle. And so we did a lot of the screening testing in the Haake system, and now we had such good results with that. We started to move up to the larger scale so we could start looking at images like these two. So this would be, a typical GTR unmodified system where you get much, much lower GTR content towards the top than the bottom. Whereas once you've incorporated that rubber, that additional rubber to swell and match densities, you end up getting something that's much more homogeneously dispersed. So this system was really instrumental in getting this project off the ground. So just to conclude here, this system that we've worked with has really enabled us to do a lot of very advanced techniques that we just couldn't do using other equipment. The ability to do very small amounts of materials is especially important when we're dealing with compounds that are just very new, and it's hard to justify scaling those up until you know that they're interesting. It's given us a lot of ability to kind of figure out processing conditions and important details for when we do want to move to things like the larger 11 millimeter or even pilot scale extruders, and also help us work out some of our chemistry tweaks. So this has been a very much a workhorse of our group since we got it, I think, about 2 years ago. So with that, I want to thank you for listening, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have.